Jason, can I tell you something that completely changed the way I think about speaking English? For years, and I mean years, I thought my biggest problem was vocabulary. Every time I couldn't express myself clearly, I blamed my vocabulary. Every time I heard a native speaker sound smooth and confident, I assumed they knew thousands of words that I didn't know. So naturally, I started collecting vocabulary lists like a person preparing for some kind of language emergency. But then one day, something surprising happened. I was sitting in a cafe listening to two native speakers talk, and honestly, they weren't using difficult words at all. In fact, most of their vocabulary was incredibly simple. Yet somehow they sounded fluent, relaxed, and natural, while my English still felt stiff and disconnected. And that's when I realized something. Fluent English isn't only about knowing words, it's about connecting ideas.
Jason. Exactly. Because imagine a train. If all the train cars are separated, nobody gets anywhere. But when they're connected, everything moves smoothly. And that's exactly what happens in conversations. Most English learners know enough words to communicate. The challenge is connecting those words into a smooth flow of ideas.
And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. By the end of this episode, you'll start noticing why some conversations sound natural and effortless, while others sound like a list of disconnected sentences.
You know, Jason, I think one of the biggest mistakes English learners make is something I call speaking in islands. And honestly, I was the queen of this mistake. Everything I said was separated, disconnected, independent, almost like every sentence was living on its own tiny island somewhere in the middle of the ocean. I'd say something like, I woke up late. Pause. I missed the bus. Pause. I took a taxi. Pause. I arrived at work. And technically, every sentence was correct. The grammar was fine. The vocabulary was fine. Nothing was wrong. Yet somehow it sounded strange.
That's because it sounds like a police report. Very accurate, but not very conversational. And what's interesting is that most learners think fluency comes from speaking faster, so they try to fix the problem by increasing their speed. But speed isn't the problem. Connection is the problem.
Exactly. Because if I tell the same story like this, I woke up late, so I missed the bus. And because I was already running behind, I decided to take a taxi to work. Now suddenly the story feels alive. The listener can follow my thinking. One event naturally causes the next event. And that's what conversations are supposed to feel like.
Right. Think about the last great storyteller you listened to. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was a podcaster. Maybe it was somebody at work telling a funny story. What made them interesting wasn't their vocabulary. It was the way each idea connected to the next one. They guided you through the story. They created momentum.
Ooh, I love that word. Momentum. Because that's exactly what happens. When sentences connect naturally, the conversation keeps moving forward. But when every sentence is isolated, the conversation keeps stopping and restarting. Stopping and restarting. Stopping and restarting. And honestly, that's exhausting for listeners.
It really is. Imagine watching a movie that pauses every 10 seconds. You'd lose interest quickly. The same thing happens in conversations. Listeners enjoy smooth movement. They enjoy following a chain of ideas. And that's why sentence connection is such an important skill.
So here's something I want everybody listening to remember. Fluency isn't about speaking faster. Fluency isn't about using bigger words. Fluency is about helping your listener move smoothly from one idea to the next. And once you understand that, everything starts to change.
Now, Jason, Let's talk about one of the most powerful words in English. And honestly, it's so simple that most learners completely ignore it. The word is and.
Poor and. It's probably the most underappreciated word in the language. Everybody wants advanced vocabulary. Everybody wants impressive expressions. Meanwhile, and is sitting quietly in the corner doing all the hard work.
Exactly. And I think many learners underestimate it because it's such a basic word. They think, I'm already using and. Surely that's not the secret. But then you listen to native speakers, and suddenly you realize they're using it constantly. Absolutely constantly. I went to the store and bought some milk. We ordered pizza and watched a movie. I met an interesting person, and we ended up talking for hours. It's everywhere.
And the reason is simple. And helps ideas grow naturally. Instead of ending one thought and starting another completely separate thought, you allow the conversation to continue flowing. It's almost like adding another train car to the train. The journey continues.
That's such a great comparison. Because here's something funny. When learners become nervous, they often stop using connectors, and suddenly their speech becomes very short, very choppy, very disconnected. But when they're relaxed, they naturally use words like and immediately they sound more fluent.
Exactly. Let's compare. Version 1, I got home, I made dinner, I watched television, I went to bed. Perfectly correct. Version 2, I got home and made dinner, and then I watched some television, and before I knew it, it was time for bed. Now it sounds like a real person talking.
And here's something even more interesting. Native speakers often use and when they're excited. Have you noticed that? When people get excited about a story, they keep adding details. And then this happened, and then she said this, and then we started laughing, and then, and then, and then.
Absolutely. Excited people love and. It's the word that keeps stories moving. It's the word that keeps listeners engaged. And honestly, if you're trying to sound more natural in English, one of the easiest things you can do is start noticing how often native speakers use this tiny little word.
Because sometimes the smallest words create the biggest improvements. And is the perfect example of that. Jason, can we talk about one of the most powerful words in English? A word that people use every single day, sometimes without even realizing how important it is? And that word is because. Honestly, if somebody asked me which word creates the most interesting conversations, because would be near the top of my list. Because the moment somebody hears a reason is coming, they immediately become curious. It's almost like the brain automatically leans forward and says, okay, tell me more. Think about it. Imagine I simply say, I stayed home yesterday. That's fine. It's a complete sentence, but it's not particularly interesting. Now listen to this. I stayed home yesterday because I accidentally stayed awake until 3 in the morning watching travel videos about places I can't afford to visit. Suddenly there's a story. Suddenly there are questions. Suddenly people want more details.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons native speakers use because constantly. Because conversations aren't just about facts, they're about explanations. People naturally want to understand why things happen. If your friend quits their job, you want to know why. If somebody moves to another country, you want to know why. If your neighbor suddenly starts learning Italian at the age of 60, you definitely want to know why.
Absolutely. And that's what makes because such an amazing connector. It transforms information into a story. For example, I'm tired. Okay, nothing wrong with that. But I'm tired because my dog decided that 4:30 in the morning was the perfect time to start barking at absolutely nothing. Now people can visualize the situation. Now they're emotionally connected. Now they're probably laughing because they've experienced something similar.
Exactly. And listeners remember stories much more than isolated facts. That's why great speakers use reasons. Great storytellers use reasons. Great conversationalists use reasons. Because reasons make people care.
Ooh, that's good. Reasons make people care. I love that. So if you're listening right now and you want your English to sound more natural, don't stop after the first sentence. Add a reason. Expand the idea. Keep the conversation moving. Because that's exactly what native speakers do every day.
Now let's talk about my favorite connector. And honestly, Jason, I think this word deserves an award for creating drama. The word is but. Because the moment somebody says, but, something interesting is about to happen.
That's so true. The word but is basically a warning sign. It tells listeners, hold on, there's more to this story.
Exactly. Imagine somebody says, the restaurant looked amazing. You're already interested. But then they add, but, and suddenly your brain immediately starts asking questions. But what? What happened? Was the food terrible? Was the service slow? Did somebody accidentally order 10 desserts? We need answers.
That's because but creates contrast. It introduces surprise. It introduces conflict. And humans naturally pay attention to conflict. Imagine these two stories. Story number 1. I studied for the exam. I took the exam. I passed the exam. Nice. Predictable. Expected. Now, listen to this. I studied for the exam for 3 weeks, but when I sat down to take it, I suddenly forgot everything. Now we're interested. Now there's tension. Now we want to know what happened next.
Exactly. And that's why movies use this technique. Books use this technique. Comedians use this technique. Storytellers use this technique. Because surprise keeps people engaged. For example, I thought the movie would be terrible. Pause. But it ended up becoming one of my favorite movies of the year. Instant curiosity. Instant emotional reaction. Jason?
And here's something interesting. Even in everyday conversations, people constantly use but. I wanted to go for a walk, but it started raining. I was planning to save money, but then I saw a huge sale. I promised myself I'd sleep early, but somehow I ended up watching videos until midnight.
Amy? I feel personally attacked by that last example. Because somehow, just one more video always turns into 45 minutes. How does that happen?
Nobody knows. It's one of life's greatest mysteries.
Okay, Jason. If because explains reasons and but creates surprises, then so does something equally important. It shows results. It answers the question, what happened next?
Exactly. And that's why so appears everywhere in spoken English. Because life is basically one long chain of causes and results. Something happens, so something else happens. Then that creates another result, and another result, and another result.
And honestly, once you start paying attention, you'll hear native speakers use so constantly. For example, I was exhausted, so I went to bed early. Simple, natural, easy to understand. Or, the traffic was terrible, so we arrived late. Again, one event directly leads to another.
Exactly. And listeners love this structure because it's easy to follow. Their brains don't have to work hard. The logic is clear. Cause, result. Cause, result. Cause, result. It's one of the simplest ways to sound smooth and organized when speaking English.
Here's another example. I forgot my umbrella, so I got completely soaked walking home. Immediately, people understand the connection. Nobody needs extra explanation. Everything flows naturally. And honestly, that's one of the biggest secrets of fluent speakers. They help listeners follow their thinking.
Exactly. Fluency isn't about complicated sentences. It's about creating clear connections between ideas. And so does that beautifully.
Now, let's talk about a word that every great storyteller uses. Then. Because honestly, if and helps ideas grow, and so shows results, then helps stories move forward.
That's a perfect way to describe it. Because life happens in sequence. One thing happens, then another thing happens, then another thing happens, and then helps listeners follow that journey.
Exactly. Imagine I tell a story like this. I woke up, I had breakfast, I left the house, I met my friend. It's okay. But now listen to this version. I woke up, then I had breakfast, then I left the house, and then I met my friend for coffee. Suddenly, it feels smoother, more connected, more natural.
Because then acts like a guide. It's almost like you're taking your listener by the hand and saying, "Come with me. Here's what happened next." And that's why great storytellers love it.
Absolutely. Think about children telling stories. They use then constantly. Then we went to the park. Then we saw a dog. Then the dog chased a squirrel. And honestly, adults do exactly the same thing. We're just slightly more sophisticated about it. Sometimes. Maybe.
Only slightly.
Exactly. And here's something important for English learners. Don't be afraid to use simple connectors like then. Many learners think they need advanced vocabulary to sound fluent, but native speakers use simple connectors all the time. Because fluency isn't about sounding complicated. It's about helping listeners enjoy the journey.
And that's exactly what then does. It keeps the story moving. It keeps the listener engaged. And most importantly, it makes your English sound much more natural.
So now we have 4 powerful tools. Because starts the story, but creates curiosity, so shows results, and then moves the story forward. And together, they can completely transform the way you speak English. Jason, can I tell you something that used to drive me absolutely crazy when I was improving my English? I would listen to native speakers, and somehow their conversations sounded smooth, relaxed, effortless, even when they weren't saying anything particularly complicated. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out why. I kept looking for advanced grammar, I kept looking for difficult vocabulary, I kept looking for some magical fluency secret. And then one day, I realized the answer was hiding in tiny little words. Words like, well, actually, so.
Exactly. And what's funny is that learners often think these words are unimportant. They think, why would I learn that? It's just a filler. But native speakers use fillers constantly. Not because they don't know what to say, but because fillers help conversations feel human.
Absolutely. Imagine somebody asks me, Amy, what did you think of the movie? I could answer, the movie was good. Perfectly correct. Nothing wrong. But now listen to this version. Well, actually, I wasn't expecting much, but it turned out to be surprisingly good. Doesn't that sound more natural? More conversational? More like something you'd actually hear in real life?
Exactly. Because fillers create breathing room. They give your brain a second to organize thoughts. They make conversations feel less robotic. And honestly, native speakers use them without even realizing it.
I do it all the time. Sometimes somebody asks me a question, and before I even think about my answer, I automatically say, well, and suddenly my brain has a few extra seconds to decide what I'm going to say.
It's like buying yourself thinking time. And listeners don't even notice. In fact, it often makes you sound more natural.
Another one I hear constantly is, you know. For example, you know, when you're trying to learn English, sometimes progress feels slow. Or, you know, I've always wanted to visit Japan. It's not really adding new information, but it makes the conversation feel warm and personal.
Exactly. And here's something important. Don't overuse fillers. If every sentence starts with, well, actually, you know, people might notice. But using them naturally can make your English sound much more relaxed and authentic.
So, if you've ever wondered why native speakers sound so smooth, part of the answer is that they don't jump directly from one sentence to the next. They use little bridges, little conversational cushions. And those tiny fillers often make a huge difference.
All right, Jason, it's time to see if everybody listening has been paying attention. And don't worry, this isn't a scary school exam. Nobody is grading you. Nobody is taking away your coffee privileges.
That's good news, because if coffee became part of the grading system, I'd be extremely nervous.
Same here. Okay, everyone, let's do a quick challenge. I'll start a sentence, and you decide which connector sounds best. Ready? Here's the first one. I wanted to go for a walk. What comes next? Would you use because or but?
The answer is but. I wanted to go for a walk, but it started raining. We have contrast. We have surprise. Perfect use of but.
Excellent. Next one. I stayed home. What sounds natural? I stayed home because? Or I stayed home then?
Definitely because. I stayed home because I wasn't feeling well. We're giving a reason. We're explaining why.
Fantastic. Now try this one. The traffic was terrible. What's next?
So we arrived late. Cause, result. Exactly what so is designed to do.
Perfect. One more? First we had dinner. What connector helps continue the story?
Then. First we had dinner, then we watched a movie. Simple. Natural. Easy to follow.
And look at that. You've just practiced 4 of the most powerful sentence connectors in English. Because, but, so, then. Honestly, if you master these 4 words alone, your English conversations will already sound much smoother.
Absolutely. Sometimes fluency isn't about learning hundreds of new expressions. Sometimes it's about using a few simple words really well.
All right, everyone. This is one of my favorite parts of every episode, because now it's your turn to speak. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now. Whether you're walking, driving, cooking, cleaning, or secretly listening during work, let's practice together. Simply repeat after us. Ready?
I stayed home because I was tired.
Excellent. Now try this one. I wanted to go outside, but it started raining.
Great job. Next one. The traffic was terrible, so we arrived late. Perfect. And one more. We finished dinner, then we watched a movie. Fantastic. Now let's combine everything into one natural sentence. Repeat after me. I wanted to go for a walk, but it started raining, so I stayed home, and then I watched a movie.
Look at that. One sentence, multiple connectors, and suddenly it sounds like a real conversation. Not isolated ideas, not disconnected thoughts. A complete story.
And that's really the big lesson from today's episode. Fluent speakers don't just know words. They know how to connect ideas, They guide listeners from one thought to the next. They make conversations easy to follow.
Before we go, we have a challenge for everyone listening. Head down to the comments and write a short story using all 5 connectors. And, because, but, so, then. Even 3 or 4 sentences is enough. Get creative. Tell us about your day. Tell us about a funny experience. Tell us about something unexpected that happened.
And don't worry about perfection. Focus on communication. Focus on flow, because that's how fluency grows.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Keep listening, keep practicing, keep connecting your ideas, and most importantly, keep enjoying the process.
We'll see you in the next episode. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone, and keep learning English one conversation at a time.